Our top story this half an hour, and that is putting America first. President Trump is set to push that message at the United Nations General Assembly. Later this morning, the president speaks at 10 a.m. Eastern. He's expected to square off with Iran 4 months after the U.S. ditched the nuclear deal and seek another summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Joining me right now to discuss all of that is Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane. General, it's good to see you this morning.
Thanks so much for joining. Welcome to Washington.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. Your thoughts on what the president will tell us and say to the UN General Assembly today?
Well, as you said in the introduction, he's going to talk about America's sovereignty and America first. And what we're really talking about there, what that translates to is trade imbalance and doing something about it, which he is. The meddling in our election, not just by Russia, but with multiple countries, and putting up a much better defense than what we have had in the past. And not only that, obviously sanctioning Russia, and if other countries are caught at it, doing the same thing with them. Secure borders are certainly part of America's sovereignty, countering terrorism as well, and just in general, protecting America's interests, protecting the security of American people and our interests around the world. I think he's going to take a slight bow for improving relations with North Korea, because he'll say that missiles are not flying over Japan, nuclear tests are not taking place, there is some rapprochement, some détente taking place, particularly between South Korea and North Korea. There's some positive evidence. However, they haven't given up a single nuclear weapon and a single ballistic missile yet.
That's a very good
point.
We
don't have an inventory of all of that, and I don't believe we have a time schedule to get this done in terms of specifics.
So a lot more to be done.
That is what's on the agenda.
Yeah, a lot more to be done.
And then, as you mentioned in the intro, I think he's going to put Iran right in the crosshairs.
I want to talk to you about that, because the EU has announced a plan to allow European companies to legally stay tied to Iran while avoiding exposure to U.S. sanctions. Now, I spoke with NSA Director John Bolton this weekend, and he basically said, look, we're adamant here. If Iran fails to behave differently, more sanctions are coming. Listen to what he said.
We want massive changes in behavior by the regime in Iran, and if they don't undertake that, they'll face more consequences, because we'll find more sanctions to impose and other ways to put maximum pressure on them.
So the current sanctions in place go into effect in November?
There's sanctions in place already. The oil and energy sector sanctions go in effect in November, and secondary sanctions on companies that continue to do business with Iran, specifically these European companies. I think the Europeans are playing a losing hand here. I mean, country's got to make a decision to do business with a $400 billion economy in Iran, even though the EU may help them out
or
a little bit.
Or a $20 trillion
economy. Here's what's already happened, though, Maria. There's a 35% reduction in Iran's oil imports since President Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal. And that's because without the sanctions, no sanctions on oil have taken place in energy yet. That happens November the 4th. Those companies see that coming, and they're finding other places to get their oil from. And this is going to get considerably worse. Iran's economy is in the tank. Their currency, the rial, is free-falling. Inflation is spiraling out of control. Unemployment is soaring. There are daily food shortages, weekly power outages, growing civil unrest in the country, and even the terrorists recognize their vulnerability, having conducted an attack last weekend, killing 25 and wounding 70. The noose is tightening around the regime's neck. 2 weeks ago, unheard of, the parliament, which is a stooge government, let's face it, almost gave President Rouhani a vote of no confidence. They wanted him to dismiss his cabinet members. In other words, they were sort of influenced and taking a little bit of control of that president. Why? Because they're blaming a lot of what is happening in Iran on the president. Certainly, they don't want to publicly blame it on the supreme leader, who's the guy that's really driving all of this.
But what's happening as a result of these sanctions in terms of others buying oil or doing deals with Iran?
Well, a lot of companies have companies that were in Iran, physically in Iran doing business, they've closed up shop and left. Others are doing the same. Trade is being cut down. The Europeans are trying to keep Iran in the nuclear deal. What is going to happen, I think? If they continue to aggressive behavior in the region, the United States, as you heard Ambassador Bolton is unequivocal about it, will slap harder sanctions on them. We're going to slap sanctions on other companies that are doing business with Iran. The noose will get tighter. And here's what I think eventually will happen. The Iranians are going to pick up the phone and dial 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and say, let's talk.
Oh, really? Wow.
I think that is inevitable, because this regime is going to be... No president has confronted the Iranian regime for 38 years like this administration is doing, whether it was Republican or Democrat. And I've been critical of all of that.
Yeah.
And now, for the first time, they're going to start to feel the pinch, not just over nuclear weapons, but over their malign behavior in the region and also over ballistic missiles. This is an absolutely different strategic approach to dealing with the Iranian problem.
This is very significant. If we were to hear Iran come back and say, yeah, let's talk, let's make some changes and do a deal together. I don't know if the president would go for that.
It's not going to happen in the near term, but it's bound to happen, because their very survival is going to be tied to it.
Well, what do they do? All right, let me switch gears and ask you about this big deal for Boeing, because the Air Force is welcoming a $2.5 billion contract with Boeing to reinvent this iconic but aging Huey helicopter. This is a big deal for Boeing. What's your take on this, and how important is it?
Yeah, these helicopters are used by the Air Force, about 84, 85 of them, to protect our intercontinental ballistic missile silos and those bases where those silos are at. And these helicopters have fancy sensors on them and a lot of other things, plus people with guns and machine guns. The Huey helicopter has been doing this work for years. Big competition took place. The Secretary of the Air Force is touting the fact that because the competition was so fierce, this is Boeing and Leonardo. Leonardo is a company out of Italy where this helicopter has already been made. And they went up against Lockheed Martin and Sikorsky, and also another company by Sierra Nevada, who produced U.S.-made Blackhawks. But listen, the good deal for the taxpayer is $1.7 billion saved out of what was potentially a $4 billion contract. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it sure is.
So it sounds like a pretty good deal.
Speaking of saving, this is the week that we were worried that the government could shut down. We're facing the deadline to fund government. Are you happy in terms of budgeting and allocating money toward defense at this point?
Oh, yeah. We're in a Trump buildup that's similar to the Reagan defense buildup. I just hope that they sustain it over time. We just can't look at these first 2 years and say, we're done. It's an installment. And we dug ourselves into a hole for 10 years, and we can't get out of it in 2 years.
All right, we will leave it there. General, it was a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, it's great seeing you, Maria.
Thank you so much for joining us, General Jack Keane there.